Hey everyone, it's Rob with R3 Shorts, here with a Behind the Voices video. We've been waiting to do this for a little while now, and we're really excited to kind of give you a look inside my mind as to how I came up with the character voices for the series. But before we get into all that, first we want to give a big thank you to our subscribers who helped fund a couple of parts of our studio. Primarily the rail system that we use to wrap the sound blanket around while I'm recording, and the mic. We got a brand new mic, and it is twice as good as the last one that we had.
Thank you!
So we wanted to list all of you guys right here, and thank you very much for supporting us during this time. So let's start things off with a story about the audition process for one of the Harry Potter movies. One of the supporting characters that entered late in the Harry Potter series was Luna Lovegood, played by Evanna Lynch in the movies. Now, when they did the audition process, there were thousands upon thousands of girls that were auditioning for this role. But Evanna Lynch came in, and she did the role based on what was in her imagination. All these other girls were trying to impress the producers and the casting directors with what they thought the filmmakers wanted to see. But Evanna Lynch was a big fan of the books. She knew the lore. She knew how she wanted it to sound in her head when she read it at home every night. So she just did that in front of them. And so at the end of the interview, if you watch the video on YouTube or wherever, she said, "This is how Luna sounds to me. This is the way that she is in my imagination. If you don't like that, if you don't want to use that for your film, that's fine. I'll go about my business, but you'll be missing out because I think that this is how she sounds." And that's it. And that's what art is about. Art is meant to be interpreted. Art is meant to be about what you see versus what I see. Or in this case, what you hear versus what I hear.
My name is Jake. That's my first name, obviously. I can't tell you my last name. It would be too dangerous.
Jake is the first character that you meet. He's the narrator of book 1, and you spend 3 to 3.5 hours with his voice before any other character comes in to narrate. So I figured that's the best time to say, this is me. This is Rob. This is what Rob sounds like. This is my normal voice. So I didn't feel that he needed an accent or any kind of pitch up or pitch down or anything like that. Just straight reading. Jake, being the leader of the Animorphs, I wanted him to be serious. I wanted him to be respected and believable. So you can listen to Marco telling jokes and roll your eyes. You can listen to Rachel say, let's do it and let's go into battle and just root for her and everything. But when Jake speaks and tries to organize things, you want to listen to him because you're eager to hear what he has to add to the situation and how he's going to lead the others.
Puny little nothing! You attack me?
Rachel has become, without a doubt, the most controversial character that I have created for these audiobooks, even if she wasn't the most controversial in the books, based purely on the way that I voiced her. She's a very strong, independently minded person, and she's always going towards the battle, not away from it. And I wanted to reflect that while still reflecting her femininity, because she doesn't wear overalls like Cassie. I mean, she's described as being very fashionable and knowing how to dress. You know, this is a very strong-willed, sassy, at times stubborn character, and she really doesn't take no for an answer unless it's from Jake, who's her cousin. You know, he's not just the leader of the Animorphs, he's her relative, so she does give him a pass. And then I think she gives Tobias a pass, not out of pity, but for reasons that we'll soon read in later books. Oh, she's a birdwatcher. She's a very strong-willed person. She knows what she wants, and she goes and gets it. Nobody tells her what to do, but at the same time, she knows when to quiet down and listen to the leaders, make the plan, and she'll follow it. Most of the time. Now, even though Rachel has a very strong personality, and she tries to be very mature, we all know that she makes a lot of decisions without regard to other people. And I wanted to bring that out in her voice. What I also tried to bring out is the fact she does things in a defiant manner, and she does other things that people don't know about, and when she's confronted about it later, she just says she doesn't care. She wants to do her own thing.
I know it's bad for security, Jake. And Marco, I know it was sentimental. But I don't care.
Another thing I wanted to bring out in Rachel's character is that while there are a couple moments where somebody thinks she can't do something because she's a girl, like right from the beginning, going home from the mall.
You guys going home? You shouldn't go through the construction site by yourselves. I mean, being girls and all. Are you going to come and protect us, you big strong man?
There are moments where she sees discrimination against her where there is none.
You didn't get creeped out by the shrew, did you? Why? Just because I'm a girl, you think the shrew bothered me more than it would have bothered you or Marco? No, that's not it at all. See, when I did the lizard morph, that bothered me. I had nightmares.
I knew that I did not want to go with the normal stereotypical voice that a lot of male narrators go for when they're voicing female characters. If you ever watch a Q&A with professional audiobook narrators, and you ask the question, how do you voice a character of the opposite gender? Most of the time, they'll tell you that men should voice the women with softer voices and kind of pitch it up here, which you can kind of tell is what I did with Cassie.
We can bandage that wound. Jake, give me your shirt. We can tear it up and make bandages.
And then female narrators will take their voice very low and they'll talk like this. And that's kind of a stereotype of how the opposite gender would sound like when you have limitations on your own voice. I wanted to break through that. And so I barely wanted Rachel to talk softly ever, unless she needed to whisper.
Can he hear our thoughts? If he can, we're so dead I don't even want to think about it.
I did want to make her female voice unique compared to the other female voices in the series. If you compare voices like Cassie, Mrs. Chapman, Melissa, Rachel's mom, and her sisters, I did kind of go the route of soft and tender in different variations. But Rachel was singular in that I wanted to hit everything with force. Because we got an influx of negative feedback regarding Rachel's voice, we wanted to go back through the audiobooks to see exactly where it went wrong. And we realized it was all in Book 3. There were no problems with Rachel in Books 1 and 2. It all fell apart in Book 3. And there's a reason for that, and we're going to get to it with Tobias.
Maybe I am trapped forever. But if we can free some of those others, maybe that's what I need to do to stay human.
Tobias is pretty much like Jake in the realm of being serious, but his voice is lower and more reserved. And I made him that way on purpose for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted him to kind of sound as serious as Jake, but he's another main character, so I wanted him to at least be distinguishable from Jake, so that when you have two serious males in the same room, that you don't confuse the two. The other reason I made him sound as reserved as he is because the guy's an orphan, and he's lonely. He felt unwanted. He liked hanging out by himself, which is why he spent so much time in Hawkmorph and eventually got stuck in it, is because he just felt like a loner. And so being unwanted by his aunt and uncle led him to really being introverted. Or at least that's the way that I read the character, is that he was introverted, didn't want to talk loud, didn't want to really express himself a lot. He's a boy of few words. And then when you compound that with the fact that he was bullied in school, I interpreted that as somebody who'd really wind up quite an introverted individual. As far as being bullied, you know, I had a lot of experience being bullied in school, and I fought back, but other people don't. And so I wanted to break the stereotype of what you think when you think of somebody who's being bullied. Normally when we see somebody in pop culture, in a movie or a TV show, who's being bullied, it's somebody who's nerdy, or at the very least, kind of an outcast who's smaller and more pint-sized, and therefore their voice is a little bit higher. Maybe it's a big older kid picking on a younger kid with a higher voice. And I personally witnessed in school people with deep voices, teenagers who had already developed kind of a baritone-based voice, but they were getting picked on by the jocks anyway. So bullies don't really care how high or deep your voice is in real life. And I wanted to bring that out in the character, that just because he's being bullied doesn't mean he's going to sound like Steve Urkel. That being said, I did an experiment with book 3 in order to do the 3 to 3.5 hours of narration with Tobias. In order to do that deep voice without having it weigh on my vocal cords and eventually make me sound like I'm trying to be Keanu Reeves, I decided to do it with what I call morning voice. When you get up in the morning, your voice sounds a little bit lower. This can especially happen if you're sick. So what I would do is, when recording book 3, I would wake up after a full night's sleep and my voice would be a lot lower, which is what you heard in the audiobook. There was no pitching down of my voice at all. And the problem with that, aside from the fact that it kind of muddied up some enunciations that I wasn't really a fan of, it made the girls' voices a lot lower. They sounded weird, didn't they? So Rachel, Cassie, anybody else who's kind of a female that I did in book 3 sounded off. And I recognized that, and I tried to go back like later in the day when my voice had gone back up into its normal pitch and do the normal Rachel and Cassie voice, etc. But it was too jarring, because is it an audiobook or is it a radio drama with multiple actors? So you have my deep voice doing Tobias narration, and then it jumps up seemingly almost an octave and a half to 2 octaves, and it didn't sound right to the ear, and I reverted it back to the normal morning voice for the girls, which is why Rachel sounded the way she did. Now, even if I delivered the lines for Rachel in a different tone, her voice still wouldn't have sounded that good. So in the future, I will not be doing the morning voice for Tobias books ever again. So, sorry.
That's not a mouse. That's a shrew. See the eyes? They're too small. And the tail is wrong. That's not a baby mouse, Tobias. It's a full-grown shrew.
Cassie was one of the most difficult voices to find, in that I am a white male, she is a black female, and in 2019, there was a lot that could have gone wrong with that. So I decided to just ignore race and focus on what her characteristics were. She's kind, she's gentle, she's very, very good with taking care of animals. And her time with animals makes her the best morpher. She's very tender-hearted, and she's a peacemaker. When everything seems to be chaotic, when they're planning and having meetings, she tends to bring everybody back down. Even Rachel and Marco when they go at it. So I wanted to give her a voice that when she spoke, her voice combined with the words that Applegate wrote on paper, they help you hear more than just a race.
Good grief. Let's all buy Birkenstocks and go hug some trees.
Marco is another character that I unintentionally turned into a controversial voice. I thought it was kind of interesting. He's been called a Ninja Turtle, a surfer dude, a tool, and that was partly how he struck me when I first read it 20 years ago. And I didn't want to fully emulate that, but I liked the humor that he put forth, and I just thought that the voice should emulate it. The backstory that I created in my head for Marco is the fact that everything revolves around his mother's death and his father's reaction to it. His mom's dead. His father is grieving. His father has grieved for many years. His father quit a prominent job, a prominent career. And to me, interpreting this, I figured that his dad would then turn to a vice, such as alcohol or smoking, to cope. And after years of inhaling secondhand smoke in the home, the smoke would eventually affect Marco's vocal cords just a bit to where it gave him a little bit of a graveliness in his voice. That was something that I applied from my own personal experience growing up. Whenever I had a friend whose parents smoked in the home, it affected their voice to where it was kind of scratchy and gravelly, and they didn't make good singers. So I figured that I would apply that to Marco. And when you combine the graveliness with the jokes that he gives and just a happy-go-lucky voice, yes, he does kind of sound like Michelangelo. So that's the origin of Marco's voice. Now, I know that I've kind of painted myself into a corner in a couple of ways. The first being that morphing really doesn't affect the injuries to your vocal cords because you're using thought speak, so his voice should be plain as day. But sorry, I wanted to be consistent, so he's gravelly in thought speak as well. Also, morphing heals you, so any damage to his vocal cords before should be gone. So my excuse for that in my head is Marco's been talking like that for so long that he's used to it now, and it's kind of hard to drop, like an accent.
If you wish, I can give you powers that no other human being has ever had. The power to morph.
Elfangor was the first character in the book series to use thought speak. And so I knew I wanted to do an effect with thought speak and what it sounds like to hear things in your mind and communicate that way. And so I wanted to make your first exposure to thought speak clear and relatively slow, with a deep, powerful voice. So anyway, that's what I wanted to do with Elfangor, was have him speak very clearly, enunciate clearly, very elegant and classy. He may be dying, he may be a warrior, a very famous warrior, but he is speaking very elegantly, so that you can appreciate thought speak the first time you hear it. And then with anybody else who uses it, like the Animorphs in Morph or VISSER 3 or any other Andalites that come in the future, you already know what the effect sounds like, so you can just enjoy the performance. But with Elfangor and pretty much the other Andalites, K.A. Applegate was heavily influenced by Tolkien. Huge fan of J.R.R. Tolkien and his Lord of the Rings universe. In fact, Elfangor's name is a nod to Fangorn Forest in Lord of the Rings. And so she created the Andalites as kind of like the elvish race of the Animorphs universe. And so I wanted to bring that out by making them sound almost elvish when you hear them. Not British per se, but just this very elegantly sounding species. A very elegant race that does not sound crude in any way, does not sound rushed or panicky. VISSER 3, of course, is different because he's got a yerk in his head. So he can kind of bend the rules. But that's kind of where I was with Elfangor.
I compliment you on getting this far, but it will accomplish nothing. Time to die.
VISSER 3, the main villain of the series. The villain that Chapman looks up to. So, with VISSER 3, I wanted to do the most powerful, authoritative, angry, demented, mildly psychotic voice that I could pull off for several sentences in a row without screwing up my vocal cords. I wanted to take the gruffness to its limit. I wanted to take the volume to its limit. I wanted to be able to just belt things out and growl and give the most intense sound without wrecking my voice. In fact, there was a point in book 2 where Chapman and VISSER 3 were talking for a lengthy period of time over the intercom in Chapman's house, and I had to do that in several takes or several days because it was just wrecking my voice. Because I was going from this to this, and it was really taxing on my voice. So the other thing with VISSER 3 that I was able to have fun with, I figured I could loosen up with VISSER 3 because even though he does have a yerk in his head, and the rule that Applegate established is that you can't tell who's a controller and who's not, VISSER 3 doesn't have to follow that rule because he's always surrounded by subordinates. He's always surrounded by people who fear him. Taxon controllers, Hork-Bajir controllers, human controllers. So he doesn't have to pretend. He's not among the human population trying to secretly accomplish this mission. He's always safe in a Yeerk ship somewhere. So he can just belt out whatever voice he wants. So I figured that would give me a lot of range in both his voice, and then it would allow me to create whatever voice I wanted for his host in the future. Because in future books, you're going to be able to see a different area in the Animorphs timeline where you actually get to know the host Endolite, whose name I will not say, before Visser 3 infests him. And so I'll be able to do whatever voice I want there. And I might make it sound the same, I might not. But because Visser 3 is not around people, free reign.
No, you filthy creep. You aren't going to win this time.
Tom, Jake's older brother. Really nothing much to say on this character. No deep motivations for making his voice the way it was. Older brothers are punks, and I kind of wanted him to sound like a punk without necessarily having that deep of a voice. He's just enough of a recurring minor character to warrant a unique voice that was recognizable. But I just thought, if somebody's going to be annoyed by Jake's subtle prying into his affairs because Jake's trying to figure out what Tom is going to do so he can figure out what the Yeerks are going to do, he could have a very annoyed voice. But aside from that, I had already done so many different character voices for the other Animorphs and for the villains. By the time I hit Tom, I just figured, all right, what is something that is different from just about everything else I've done before? And I came up with this very cool, chill voice, man. Party on, dude. That's it.
Just save the head. Bring that to me, and we can identify it.
So for Assistant Principal Chapman, I had a lot of things in mind, a lot of ideas based on what he says and what he does. But before I talk about him, I just want to say that if you're a fan of the TV show Gotham or the movie Infinity War, the Marvel movie, I will be giving slight minor spoilers. So just know that before you hear this. So with Chapman, the main thing about him is that this is a young adult series. It was written in first person from the voices of 5 children so far. And so what are things that are happening from their perspective? And most kids, when they look at people of authority in their lives, they tend to exaggerate their influence. You see a lot of TV shows and movies where people look at like a principal or their parents or somebody of strong authority as like this fire-breathing dragon that they have to slay or something like that. So I wanted to exaggerate the intimidation of Assistant Principal Chapman's voice, even if that might not be what he sounds like in real life. So when he turns around to Rachel in book 2 and says, "I know where you live," that might not have been the way he said it, but that's her perception of him. Because there are repeated places in the books where Marco, most of the time it's Marco saying, "That is so Chapman." It's like, just save the head. That's so Chapman. And it's like, why would that be Chapman? Why would Marco have the impression that that is something that Chapman would say? Well, because maybe before the Yeerk infested Chapman, they were afraid of him anyway. So why not give him that kind of intimidating Liam Neeson from Taken voice? So doing Chapman's voice was actually difficult during the middle of book 2 because, there were several scenes with Chapman and Visser 3 talking on a hologram or over a hologram phone call conversation. So you have Chapman, who talks like this, and he's very down low. And then you have Visser 3, who has a very authoritative voice. And so bouncing back and forth between those guys for like an entire chapter at a time, that was weighing on my voice like incredibly. So it took a little bit longer to record. I'd have to go back over several days and re-record some lines where my voice would just crack after a while. To have those two guys in the same room, ugh. In the climax of book 2, I wanted to showcase so much in such a short amount of time. The first thing is when the Yeerk gives up control to the real Chapman, which he probably hasn't done for a long time, with the exception of the 3-day periods where he refills Kandrona. Chapman falls to his feet, and so I figured if he hasn't used his body for a while, he's flubbing to make sounds with his mouth. It's taken a while for him to make sounds with his mouth. He's probably going to have a different voice, too. And in the TV show Gotham, Jim Gordon, the main character, had a Boy Scout appearance. He spoke really clearly, had a very pure voice almost. And over the course of the seasons, actor Ben McKenzie was slowly gruffing up his voice. The more gray area actions, as far as morality, that Jim Gordon took part in, the more he started gruffing up his voice and just showing that Gotham was getting to him. Gotham was tainting his sense of morality. So in season 1, he talked kind of like this, and then as you got into season 4, he talks a little bit more gruff, and he almost sounds like the Dark Knight from time to time. And it was a really interesting thing, so I wanted to show that in Chapman. And just showcase that this Yeerk has had control of Chapman for so long that it has gotten away with gruffing up Chapman's voice slowly, bit by bit, without his family and friends noticing it. And it has just become a part of his character. The other thing I wanted to showcase was we were actually pregnant with our daughter at the time that I was making the audiobook for book 2. And because Chapman was sacrificing so much for his daughter, it just translated to us so clearly, what would we do for our daughter? So I was actually able to put a lot of that into the performance with just the forceful voice, the very authoritative, almost Liam Neeson style voice, and just really make art imitate life because it hit so close to home. The last part about Chapman in the climax that I really wanted to showcase was his relationship with Visser 3. So when Marvel was making the movie Infinity War, something that they had to battle with was the public's perception of Thanos. There were a lot of jokes going around within the community and on the internet that Thanos was useless and he didn't do much because ever since the first Avengers movie, he was in all these post-credit sequences. He's just sitting on his throne, not doing anything. So a lot of people joked that he was going to be kind of a useless armchair general of a villain that was just a really intimidating voice. So what the directors did in the first 5 minutes of Infinity War that was brilliant was they had Thanos do all these incredible feats in a short amount of time. He conquered Thor's people, wiped them out on the ship that he was flying on, killed Thor's best friend, single-handedly killed Loki, and single-handedly beat Hulk in a one-on-one fist fight without using any Infinity Stones that were already attached to his gauntlet. The directors were basically saying, this is the power of the villain that you're going to be watching for the next 2.5 hours. Respect him. And so I wanted to put that into the climax of book 2. Yes, Visser 3 was already evil and psychotic, but I wanted to have Chapman give this strong, authoritative voice about how he would protect his daughter, and I'm going to do anything to protect my daughter. And it's a voice that scares the living daylights out of the Animorphs, but Visser 3 is just not impressed at all. He's just laughing at him, going, "You? A threat?" And he just pushes him down. And so I wanted to give Chapman that intimidating, gruff kind of voice so that when Visser 3 is unimpressed with him, it really hits home like, no, you respect Visser 3 and how strong he is, because Chapman, the guy that scares the fool out of the Animorphs, he's unfazed by him. So that's what I came up with for Chapman, and I hope you liked it. So that was the Behind the Voices for our Animorphs audiobook. And it's kind of a volume 1, since there's going to be a lot more characters to join the Animorphs universe in the future. But those are the characters for now. Go ahead and like and subscribe and click that little bell underneath the video to be notified whenever we upload another video. So stay tuned, because we're also going to be releasing another video in the weeks to come regarding our copyright status and our ongoing talks with Scholastic over the future of the Animorphs audiobooks.
So even though you think I'm a tool, you're gonna have to deal with it because I'm in the books for a long time.
They only think you're a tool because you are one, Marco.
At least I'm not the one who weighs as much as my elephant morph.
Don't make me stomp you.
Both of you be quiet. I can't hear myself think. Hey, VISSER 3, anybody ever tell you you sound like Shredder? I'll shred you.